project, and then we start maybe with some Q&A.
Absolutely. Yes, please feel free.
Yeah, well, I thought you would make some short overview, and then we start maybe with some Q&A. For everyone.
Okay. Would you like me to go over the deck?
Well, up to you. Just, I guess, because, you know,
Maybe
from my perspective, probably.
If that's okay, right?
Yeah, just a conversation.
And then I'll be happy to answer questions from the conversation or from the deck.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll start by introducing myself first, right? Since this is the first time we've met each other. And then I'll talk about the company and the problem that we're solving, right? So to the degree that you already heard about me, you know, thanks to Dimitri, some of this may be repeated information, but I think some of the highlights working backwards is that most recently I was the CEO of a company called Arimo that was acquired by Panasonic about 4 years ago. And a lot of the work that we do in Itomatic today is from the learning there. I was the guy in charge of global AI at Panasonic. So we did a lot of use cases having to do with what we call physical industries, right? Meaning not Google and not Facebook, where it's all digital in, digital out. These are avionics, automotive. I think you know that Panasonic today is not the consumer electronics company that it used to be. Panasonic makes all the batteries for Tesla, for example. So we did some of the manufacturing science there, cold chain, supply chain, refrigeration systems, and so on. Prior to joining Panasonic as part of the acquisition, of course, I was the founder of Arimo, and that was around 10 years ago, 9 years ago, 2012. And prior to that, I was the first engineering director of Google Apps. Right, when I got there was no Google Apps yet. It was search, ads, and the kitchen sink. Right, and the kitchen sink included things like Gmail, calendar, and we acquired Jotly, which became Docs, and then also spreadsheets and so on. And in 2007, we put all that together and launched an enterprise product called Google Apps. It's gone through many iterations since then, but that was the product that my team helped build and support. My background, I grew up. Well, it depends how far you back you go. I was born in Vietnam. By the way, it's a very exciting place today, right? In terms of development and so on. So I'm invested in some of the projects there. If you folks have any interest, we can compare notes. But I was born there, and the fall of Saigon in '75. We were stuck there for 3 years, and then my family escaped to Malaysia, and so came to the U.S. As a refugee child back in 1979. And that turned out to be a lucky thing. It's one of those things, fortunately, unfortunately, right? It was right at the beginning of the PC revolution, the computer revolution, and we resettled right in San Jose, California, which is the heart of Silicon Valley. And I was 13, and I basically started hacking and have not stopped hacking since then. So I am a hacker at heart. Did my undergrad at UC Berkeley in electro-engineering computer sciences. My background, I can talk semiconductor physics as well as I can talk AI. I got my PhD at Stanford, and then immediately after that, so I worked at Xerox, Intel, HP, and so on. But immediately after the PhD, I joined a startup university. I'm not if you're familiar with the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology in Hong Kong. It was started with the view of trying to make Hong Kong remain relevant after the China takeover. So I ended up starting the computer engineering program there. And then after that, I left the university and did 2 startups. The first one did system integration with Netscape, which is where Mark Andreessen and I met when we were both young men. I still have hair, he does not. And I sold that company to WPP, and anyway, so came back to Silicon Valley to retire. But it turns out my friends who stay in Silicon Valley, were then at Google at the time, and say, hey, Christopher, you have a lot of enterprise experience. Please join us and try to inject some enterprise sensibility into this thing that we're trying to sell. Obviously, I failed because Google remains a very consumer centric company, but I think finally Tom Curry and maybe making some headway in turning the cloud division into a strong enterprise company. But anyway, that's a long overview of my career. I think the summary is I can be quite empathetic because in almost the shoes of every person I've met, I've been in those shoes at one point or another in my life. So as far as the company, we solved this very interesting problem that we ran into repeatedly when trying to create value as part of Panasonic. And I'll call that the small data problem. Contrary to popular belief, for most use cases of interest, particularly in physical industries, there is not enough data for machine learning. And when I say data, you can refine it as labeled data, clean data, and so on. But in any case, all of these wonderful algorithms that I was part of in academia, creating and then also using at Google, all run into this data wall. And I'll talk more about why such a data wall exists. But the solution that we eventually came up with was there's so much human knowledge expertise that's an asset in a company like Panasonic and every other company. If we can just automate that knowledge, right, capture, codify it, and not go back to the old days of just expert systems, but build it in a harmonious combination with machine learning, right? There's a term called ensembling, for example. You can put two different models together and have an ensemble of them. And the ensemble is actually better than either individual model because it knows, it's kind of like listen to two different experts. Dmitry is a great expert in Russia. I may be an expert in Silicon Valley. So the combination of us is better than either one alone when it comes to, you ask about investment questions, for example. That's the basic idea behind ensembling. So if you can codify human knowledge and then start with very little data with your machine learning side, you can get to market right away, right? And then over time, as you collect more data, you can shift, the decision-making more and more to the data-driven world. And that's how our customers win in the marketplace, rather than investing another $5 million and wait 3 years to collect more data. And in some of these cases, that data never comes. The example being, if you're doing predictive maintenance and you want to train on the past failures, well, these equipment are built not to fail, right? So the number of failures, once you stratify it to particular conditions and so on, is never going to be enough for machine learning, right? And so what Automatic does is we solve that problem and give our customers, or help our customers build a solution that they can get to market with. Why don't I stop there and maybe have a conversation directed by some of your questions.
Thank you, Christopher. That's quite a story, a personal one and the business one. Maybe I just ask my first question because I heard it from other people, and then I let others to ask. How big you think this company can be in the future? How big is the market, and what is the market for your company?
Right. The size of this, I would estimate, basically from the scale of two things. Number one is the scope of the industry, like where is this problem applicable to, right? And as we've learned, it's actually 90%, not the 10%, right? Turns out the Googles are the 10%, right? We're still very much physical animals, right? And the industries that touch our lives are, tractors and machines and cars and planes and solar panels and so on. And the other is the scale of what is possible for company today. That was to reach the addressable market, through ours is a SaaS delivered product. So the analogy that I would use is, for example, a Databricks. which I was actually involved in the Apache Spark, in the very early days. If you look up the Spark project, my name is there as one of the early contributors. The analogy is Databricks is sort of the data layer, right? And Itomatic is the application layer. With every technology generation, we always build things like this, right? Whether it was web or mobile and now AI, you need a application stack. You need a technology stack, and the stack involves user experience at the top, right? And then the business logic or some other term for it is the application engine layer. And then you need the data engine layer. So Databricks is sort of the data engine. And typically as you go up the stack, the value is higher. So I would say the size of a Databricks is the minimum possible size for an opportunity like this. And so I don't know what you're invested in Databricks, but it is doing about 600 million revenues today. And I think the last round valued at 47 billion, right? So I would use that as a comparable. Right?
That sounds good, Christopher. 47 billion. Sergey?
Yes, thank you. My name is Sergey, and it's nice to meet you, Christopher. Very interesting. Thank you, Dmitry, for organizing this call. I have two questions. First question is, if I understand you right, you try to replace the classical machine learning on combination of machine and human learning. That the idea is to extract some knowledge from the people, which helps to use less data to create a proper modeling. But my question is very basic. How do you going to extract the knowledge from the people? Normally, people who got the knowledge, they're quite busy and have to provide the necessary level of engagement of people in this process. Normally, data labeling, it's quite boring process, which the people don't like it. People don't like spend their life on the data labeling and to prepare the data. It's very. This is the first question. I have a second one. Could you please answer this one? No, could you please answer on the first one?
Okay. I think you're exactly right. Well, first on two counts. Number one is the overall, the overview of the general, I would call it philosophy, right? Because the particular techniques can be varied. It could be fuzzy logic, could be physical equations and so on. But you're absolutely right. We would classify anything that comes from the human brain, right? As opposed to learned from data as this class of algorithms that will get you to market sooner rather than waiting for the data. And you're also right that extracting human knowledge requires sitting down with the experts and go through interviews and actually go through the actual, for example, in predictive maintenance, say, in this case, when you look at, now that we see that something is wrong, what do you normally do? And then the expert would have to go through and say, well, I look at the pressure here, I look at the temperature, you see clearly that spike, and based on my experience, that indicates the compressor is going to be the problem. So you have to go through that whole manual process with that expert. It turns out, number one, it is possible, but it turns out that the experts in these cases, in many cases, are very willing to do that because it is to be compared with the status quo. And the status quo is that they have to do that process all day, every day at scale, and they're completely overwhelmed. But if they would invest a small amount of that time helping us or working with us or working with their AI engineering teams to codify that, the prospective value that they get from it is that they get, they can move on to much higher value tasks, right? I'll give you an example in the predictive maintenance use case for refrigeration. This is a Panasonic use case. The ultimate customer is Lawson, right? Lawson, 7-Eleven, when they say 7-Eleven in the US, people say, what? But 7-Eleven is huge in Japan. And Lawson and Family Mart are numbers 2 or 3. There are literally only 3 experts in all of Japan at this organization called Sunkey, which is a subsidiary of Panasonic, responsible for diagnosing all these things. So they're very happy to be able to offload, to automate a lot of their expertise to classify some of these things, right? Because the alternative is much more painful.
Mm-hmm. My next question is about it's dealing with the scalability of your service. Imagine you really have a service which could combine the machine learning and human extraction with some knowledge from the human, but you need to deal with you need to talk with the expert. In your example, you say in your company there is only 3 person who is got this knowledge, and imagine you need to go to another company, not in Panasonic, to another company, and how much time you're going to spend on onboarding process to find in a huge corporations where those experts are, keep in touch with them, make appointment, make them engage, get instructions. What is it? I just imagine this process from my point of view, it could really kill any growth, really.
Yeah, so that actually goes at the business model. The business model is we actually don't do this ourselves, right? We provide the tooling and the platform for our customers to do it for themselves. So that's why we have, for example, when we talk to investors, for example, so it's an opportunity for me to state, we have a specific profile for desirable customers and those that are not yet a fit. And one key requirement is that they are not just thinking about AI. They actually have teams already of data scientists, of data engineers and so on. We call them generically as a group. They must already have an AI engineering team, and ideally they have failed, right? Like everybody fails, but teams that haven't failed means they actually haven't tried. But coming back, meaning these are people that are already pretty sophisticated. They understand the data wall problem. And so they would actually do that heavy lifting, right? So on a scalable manner from the business point of view, it's all the teams around the world, right? Now, in the beginning, the early days, we of course, just like any software business, we have to provide some consulting to guide them along. But the scale business is not about us going out there to do that professional services.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Could you please think about a bit different type of example? When I have an example of people who really fail in order to extract some useful knowledge from the data. I had a chance to talk with the people from Airbus. They saw that we had terabytes of the data we collected from each flight, but they had no idea what to do with this data. Yeah. We get a guess that it's contains some meaningful insights, but we have no idea what to do with this data. It's quite complicated. It's a much more complicated case in business, and comparing with as you started your example, maintains prediction. Maintains prediction, or it's very simple things. From my point of view, it's just a temperature and the vibration level. So you have two sensors. You measure temperature, you measure vibration, and for sure there is a critical temperature and critical vibration, which should probably, you correct me.
That's simple. Because what you describe is reactive maintenance, not predictive maintenance. Predictive maintenance means before these things reach whatever the levels of breakage, you're actually saying 2 months from now, based on this behavior, the compressor will fail. But at that point, nothing has failed, right? So it's not, what you describe is the status quo. People, and in fact, that's what Panasonic wants to improve on. I mean, the status quo is actually the state of the art. It's not like they have nothing, right? It's a high quality organization. They provide excellent service, but only when something has happened. In many cases, before the customer knows, because these people sit. There's a tower, the Tokyo tower that they sit in, right? And they monitor all these things all the time. But they're really trying to advance the state of the art, which is, can we do it a month in advance, right? So that we can plan the parts properly, right? We can plan the routes and everything. So it's like it's high efficiency over efficiency, as opposed to, by the way, that's an interesting perspective as well, because when I talk to other people and they say they've succeeded at predictive maintenance, it turns out they have not succeeded at predictive maintenance in the true case. What they have done is, for the first time, install some sensors, just exactly you described, and they're actually for the first time, they actually see what's going on. So of course, that is better than nothing, but that's not true predictive maintenance.
Okay, interesting. Good. But have you got any communications with besides the Panasonic? Because I understand that your project is a kind of spin-off of some R&D happened inside the Panasonic, but it's very interesting how this project is perceived in the other world.
Right. I'll give you one other example. I may have shared that with Dimitri already. Completely different industry. This company called Furuno, right? And if you do boating, you may recognize the name. They have the largest market share in marine navigation and sonar ranging, and then also fish finding, right? So they actually came to us in this case because they it's another Japanese company, and somehow Panasonic people network, they find out with this philosophy that we can help encode human knowledge and combine it with machine learning. So they already had this thesis on their own, which is a fish finder is a machine simply that shoots a sonar beam directly straight down, and then the echo that comes back is an echogram. So if anyone here is not familiar with an echogram, think of an ultrasound image of a baby, right? When you and I look at an echogram, so I can't tell. In fact, I can bring it up for you. It just looked like a bunch of squiggly lines with colors and so on. But an expert fisherman, over years of using this, or I don't know, months of intensive training or something, will be able to say, oh, that's a school of mackerel right there, right? And even say that's a 2-inch mackerel versus 4-inch and so on. And then another one is like, that's actually not mackerel, that's sardine. And when that human expert does that, he or she is incorporating lots of data that isn't just in the echogram, like it's in Hokkaido versus southern Japan. So of course, only certain kind of fish, what month of the year. So there's lots of stuff that isn't available in the data. So Furuno says, for their business case, they say, if we can somehow make a machine that do that, we can now sell our fish finder to 1 million amateurs instead of just maybe 10,000 experts. So they came to us with that use case, and so we're now in the process of helping them do the same process of what we talk about here. Completely different use case. In their case, they want to extract the knowledge of the expert fisherman, but also take, again, not going back to just the old expert system do everything, because there's limits that like there are errors that are very sharp about that. Let me share my screen to complete this story. Okay. This comes from a talk I just did at 8 a.m. I'll share with one slide. Let me know you can see the screen.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the expert fisherman. It's not the right image for him, but and so that what Furuno is doing is using our software to train a fuzzy logic model, right? Like if it looks red and it's about there's a cluster of these lines, then it's sardine. I don't even know myself. All right. And so what they have is an increasingly, as they're doing this, they get a better and better fuzzy logic model. But once they get the fuzzy logic model, they use that to generate data, right? And then based on that, they train a machine learning model. So in ML, we call that teacher-student model, right? The teacher is the fuzzy logic model, and then it teaches a machine learning model. And the advantage of doing so is that you may think that these are two identical models, but they're not, right? The student always differs from this teacher in some meaningful way. And then they ensemble it together, right? And the ensemble is always better than the individual one, right? As I mentioned earlier. And so, and this is an ongoing process, right? But what this means is that, let's say, after this interview process, they have something that works right away. And then they train this and they make a better combined model out of it. And as new data comes in, basically over time, it feeds back into the ensemble, and the ensemble gets better and better. So that's what's really new and unique about this whole approach, right? It's neither just machine learning, because machine learning cannot solve this problem by itself. And it's neither just expert system, right? Because that's too much work to get it right. And once you've done it, it's fixed, right? Until you invest more effort. So this one is you invest once, you get the ability to get to market right away, but you also get the transition to the more data-driven world as you have more data coming in.
Clear. Thank you for your answers. Probably somebody also want to ask.
Just to follow up on this, Christopher. So these things, it's done by clients, right? And
correct.
You would provide tools for them to play with the physiologic models and ML models and create an ensemble. How involved you need to be during that process?
The answer changes. Right now, quite involved, right? Because we're learning as we go. In other words, as we build a product, these are the lighthouse customers that help us. You know, like 6 months ago, I did not have this picture on the screen, right? We're learning this from our own customers. But the idea is that, so for example, to the customer, once they create this fuzzy logic model, everything else is automatically done, right? None of this requires human effort beyond some administration, pushing a button here and there, right? The creation of the machine learning model is automatic. The creation of the training ensemble is automatic, and the ongoing improvement of the ensemble, retraining the ensemble is also automatic. All of that is software that we build, right? And that's the product that is part of the product vision, but also informed by how our lighthouse customers are using it. So right now, we're doing a lot of that heavy lifting because we want to build a product to fit to the market. But this is very reusable to basically many other use cases.
Right. And then with time, I understand you expect to be involved much less, and that would make it much more scalable.
That's right. That's right.
And
Dmitry, I may have shared with you, not part of the deck, but you saw the breakdown between software and services, or what I call SaaS and solution engineering.
Yes.
Long term, we are targeting 80-20. The business plan for this year was going to be 30-70. That is 30 software, 30 SaaS, and 70% solution engineering. But we're, you may remember my commentary, I said we're actually ahead of that. We're going to end the year at 50-50.
Yep.
Right.
Let's see if we have other questions.
Probably I will ask one more question if nobody pretends. As I understand this, in your slide, the student model is automated already, combined model is automated, but how time and efforts it takes to prepare this onboarding the teacher model? I mean, experts who need to interact with a machine learning model. I understand that it's a work on the side of the clients, but how much takes for time and effort for the clients to understand the idea behind the
answer is variable based on use case. We've had quite a number of use cases already. So for example, if you go back to the predictive maintenance use case, that one was, I don't want to use the word easy, but simpler in comparison. And the reason for that is we're automating something that the expert, a procedure that he already goes through in his head. It's like he has this playbook already, and we just sit down and okay, tell me, teach me that. You know, if you the time is more, the AI engineering team learning how to understand what the other person is saying. The other person, the expert, already has a procedure. So in that case, it was pretty straightforward. For this one, Furuno has to figure out, okay, how do we capture that in the first place? Like, what are you seeing? And then, so in detail, it's so allow me to go a little deep so I can sort of talk about why this one is more complicated. Imagine you're looking at an image, right? Like an ultrasound. And then the expert is saying, I can see that cluster of lines, right? Well, how do you express the idea of a cluster of lines? So it turns out we build another machine learning model, nothing to do with the main business. It's more like an image recognition, right? A featureizer, right? So we help our in this case, we help Furuno build a featureizer to transform the raw image into a feature set that matches the language of the expert. So that effort itself, take maybe a couple of months. So it can be sort of multi-step, but the end of the result is that there's a pipeline that is very much human created that goes, in this case, from an image to a decision. You're looking at a school of fish, and you're looking at air bubbles, you're looking at algae, you're looking at sardine, and so on. That itself is a pipeline.
Christopher, I have some questions here in the form of text. One of them is, what is the length of the sales cycle until you get money from the client? So I understand that, I assume that since you provide these tools immediately, so the client starts playing with them and paying immediately, but maybe you elaborate on that.
Yeah, so the answer is both a business model as well as a improvement in processes. So inherently, as let's say day zero, we have just, a PowerPoint deck. So clearly to work with the customer all the way through to a solution, building software and so on, it can take 6 months. But now that we have the software already, right, and the customer starts building things, the sales cycle is much shorter, right? So we're looking at about 90 days today. That's number one. We also changed the business model of when we charge, right? Because remember, this is a model, a business where we don't want to do too much services. So we don't want to do that work. And so, but we sell access to the SaaS platform. And so we charge right away for the development work, right? So the minute the customer or the prospect is convinced that this is what they want to do, then they pay a license to access our development platform in the cloud. And so if you count that, the timing can be as short as 30 days, right? But remember, this is not production revenue yet. Production is when so for example, we have, I'm not sure if I shared with you, we have an extremely scalable opportunity, automotive, right? Like the first deployment is going to be 130,000 vehicles on the road, but it's going to be the next 3 years from now. So we're getting, $100,000 a year for development, but then suddenly 3 years from now, it'll be millions, right? So there's two phases of that revenue, but in terms of being in revenue with the development platform, that can be as short as 30 days.
Could you elaborate a little about the difference between production and development? I understand, take an example of this automotive client. I guess they already use the platform, use your app engine, and so they're already paying. What is going to happen at the point of starting production? You mean them starting production, using it more, or how does it?
You can think of, from our customer's perspective, right? We're already in production with but from our customer's perspective, for every customer, there's a application development phase, and then there's the deployment and execution of that application, right? Yep. So automotive, for example, this is an in-cabin experience situation, right? The next generation, experience, when you walk in, it's all personalized. It can detect that you're falling asleep and things like that. It knows when to charge your car because of your calendar and so on. So the development phase, and in automotive, it's a very long cycle for their development. Like people are already, like, we already know what the cars look like 3 years from now today. So between now and then, they're in development. when they do deploy, we get, let's say, 10 cents for every ping to our cloud server, right? Because we have this AI execution stack.
Okay.
And so that scales with how many vehicles they have on the road. Of course, we do a package deal, so it's not like multiply by number of cars, but there are tiers to it.
Okay, next question I have in text is, you mentioned, Christopher, that you expect this approach to be prevalent in the future, and you are ahead of everyone for a number of reasons. And the question is about that on the market, there are many free of charge clones, or there can be in the future. So what is your competitive advantage against them?
Right. So I see two main vectors. Number one that we talked about, it's very interesting. It is, I call it cultural. And I come from machine learning, so I understand it very well. Once you come from a certain culture, in this case, machine learning, you don't want to consider the alternative, right? You keep hitting, if you hit against the wall, then you tell your customer, I can't help you, right? So people don't want to use this, human knowledge-based approach, by and large. There will probably be a few that will adopt this, but then of course they have to get it systematic in the way that we do. So in that sense, we have quite a window of time with this particular opinion, right? That there are other people trying to solve it by let's find better ways to generate data, for example, but still machine learning. So that's sort of one advantage that we have in terms of the lead. The second one is, as we can see in today's software or ecosystem, there's something very interesting. The value of open source says that it is not in the lines of code, right? It is in the team that create and maintain that open source. So the example, again, let's go back to Databricks because I know that example very well. When Spark became insanely popular, IBM actually tried to seize it from the Databricks team. That is to seize the moral ownership, if you will. And IBM actually, invested 100 people and hired Eric Balderschwiller, a good friend of mine who led Horton, who led Hadoop at Yahoo, hired him to run that team. And they invested a lot of money and marketing. You can go back and Google, but they still failed to take Spark away from Databricks, if you will, because people still go back to the team that created, because they trust those people and they have the original vision. And of course, they have the innovation, the actual ongoing innovation comes from that team. So there's an interesting moat to open source that people don't recognize yet, but that's why Confluent, the Kafka team exists, and Kafka, you can download Kafka and do it yourself, and yet we have, I don't know what Confluent is worth today, but $6-7 billion public company. So we're counting on that pattern, us being what I call sort of the moral owner of this whole human first open source project, to be that other vector.
Oh, interesting. We touched a little bit about open source today earlier in the call, and obviously people were asking questions like, if it's an open source, then maybe someone else will take it and repeat this business model with the same software. And apparently, as you mentioned, it's not as easy. Maybe just articulate again, what are the advantages of open source as you see them for your company in comparison with not being open source? And why have you decided to be open source?
Yeah, and I myself had a change of perspective over the last decade on this, right? 10 years ago, certainly 20 years ago, CIOs, I remember trying to sell not exact open source, but the equivalent, to sell Gmail to enterprise, and CIOs were making decisions that were not, basically cannot trust open source. We can trust a Microsoft Exchange, right? Who's responsible for that project and so on. Today, it's completely the opposite. It's almost like a requirement, certainly a preference that it be open source over proprietary software. So open source today is an advantage where it was a disadvantage before. And the reason for that shift is that people have now seen very profitable uses of these open source projects, where you take the Amazon model, right? Amazon AWS for the most part runs on open source. So why would I'm a CEO who uses Amazon. Why is that? I could easily bring up an email server, have my team do it. I bring up an application server, bring up a Linux server, and so on. But we don't want to be troubled with any of those things. We want to concentrate on our core and have Amazon do the heavy lifting of operating these things. And so that layer is happening with Databricks. People want to pay Databricks to run Spark for them, and then they just enjoy Spark. The preference for open source is that, if there's anything happen and they need to know what's going on, they can look at the source code. But the source code itself is not what the value they get from Databricks. The value they get from Databricks is the expertise to run Spark at scale so that they can concentrate on their core business. So at the application service layer where we are, it's going to be the same thing. People are not going to be interested in running this software themselves if we can run it better than them at a much better cost, and they don't have to hire the people to do those things. But they would prefer the open source because they feel like they have access to that source code if they need to.
Interesting. Thank you. Another question is about marketing, or market rather. You mentioned that you are in the phase of finding product market fit, and the question is the market prepared for such a product, or it could happen that the market may be ready only in 5 years?
So the product market fit is really, like you build a company, and it has to be a zigzag, if I could describe it that, right? We have this long-term vision, and that's why we work with lighthouse customers. Like when you work with customers, it's a guarantee that you will solve their problem because you're listening to them, right? So this all goes back to really execution. It's a very simple thing to understand, but it's a very hard thing to do, which is you must not do this like 5 guys sitting in a room like I am. You have to be out there talking to the customers all the time, and then helping them solve. And that's why I did the talk this morning. It was not a public talk. It was a talk to, I hope they become customers. Hopefully next time we talk, it's a company called Wesco, W-E-S-C-O. They are one of the largest distributors to electric utilities, energies, and so on. And they want to put together, using our ideas and AI, an intelligent layer on top of the components. They're just a hardware mover, right? But they want to put all that together. They have the advantage of seeing the system that are being put together. So helping a customer like that solve their particular problem, but with our product, it is the key to making sure you get product market fit, right?
Thank you. Christopher, sorry, I have another question here. Wow, it's a long one. What is your role in the company? Are you a jack of all trades, or are you focusing primarily on a product sales, something else?
Okay, so question to me personally, not the company, correct?
Yes, to you. What is your role in the company?
Well, my title, I'm CEO, right? My particular strength is product vision and engineering, right? So I can be very valuable to the sales process, because when people see me and talk through this, okay, yeah, this is not BS, this is real, but I'm not the sales guy. We have somebody else who managed the sales process. I'm not good at that. We have a marketing head who's very good at putting together messaging frameworks and so on. The sentence that you see here on the screen right now, that was not created by me, but that was our marketing head putting together. There's a structure to this that I can go into, but that's something that I would have been able to come up with. So yeah, we have a full team, by the way. we're not 3 guys in a garage. We have 20 people already, because essentially the whole team that has worked together for the last 6-7 years, for the most part, 80% of that, you know, we already know where we fit, you know, as wheels in a well-oiled machine. So yeah, I have my particular role as CEO and product vision, but I know what I'm good at, and I know what I'm not good at as well. I'm not good at process management. So that's the job of our COO.
And can you describe a little bit your team? How many people do you have, and what are these people? How long did you work together?
I say for the most part, we worked together 6-7 years already, since the founding of Remo before the acquisition by Panasonic. I mentioned the role of the marketing head. We have only one person doing, you know, who's full-time doing marketing, and she outsources everything. So she has a whole marketing team, but they're not employees. Nanda Kishore, I don't recall if you met, but essentially he's my co-founder, very senior person, very good person for me to bounce off of. When he's high, I'm low. When he's low, I'm high. I think that's extremely valuable based on my long time startup experience. And so he managed the sales process as well, but he's also a very technical guy. He's just much better at process management than I am. And then we have the product team, which is joined at the hip today with the engineering team. So that is certainly the majority of the company, about 7-8 people. And then we have what we call the AI solution engineering team. So think of that as the consulting team. They are the glue between product and the customer, right? They push out the product ideas, but they also take the use case requirements coming back in. So we call it, sometimes I refer to it as IC, right? AISE, AI solution engineering. And we have a head of that. His name is Tim Rosario. He matured amazingly. He joined us as a postdoc out of Texas, working on deep learning in healthcare, and he joined us 4 years ago, and now he's heading up the consulting effort, and that's the major pieces of the company. We have one person in charge of administration, HR, and so on.
So how many people in total right now?
20.
20.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it is great that you guys did work together for some time, well, for a long time, apparently, and you worked exactly on the same problem. So it's not like really a startup from zero, but you have a basis to start from. Let me take another question, because it's, I guess, Christopher, and it's we are almost an hour. We will not take a lot of your time. The final one is, what are the biggest challenges for your company to become a unicorn?
Okay, I'm going to answer the question in the following way, because the threshold for being a unicorn is very low these days. I don't mean to sound arrogant. It's not my credit. It's the liquidity in the system. So if that is literally what is meant, I would say the challenge is really just the few next steps, right? So for you to become a unicorn, I see that as possibly within the next 2-3 years if we do everything right. It would be product market fit, right? Where we transition from this lighthouse customer, which we should do one at a time to make sure we get these things right, to one where we have a lot of inbound, right? We're out there, our marketing runs well, but more importantly, we know that our product is broadly applicable and we can take a lot of inbound demand. I think that's a particular milestone. Like you can see that happening when the sales funnel, right? You know, you put a website out there and then inquiries come in and you close the sale within 30 days. We're not there yet, but I think from here to unicorn status, that would be a key milestone, right? Now getting to like a Databricks, you know, $50 billion valuation, there's a lot of other things going on, you know, scaling people and processes and so on. But that would be my answer to unicorn status.
I think that was a good question to conclude the discussion for today. Being a unicorn is good enough, and then going from there is the next thing. So let me thank you, Christopher, on behalf of everyone for taking your time, and it was a very interesting discussion. We learned a lot about AI and ensemble of algorithms and other interesting things. I can tell you that this discussion in person I have with the club and you have today is the first discussion, but we announced this project about 2 days ago, and we had a lot of interest, even without people talking to you or to me. It seems like intuitively people believe in your project, so therefore we have commitments, and I mean, they're changing, they're adding up with time. So hopefully
that's awesome. Yeah, and thank you for organizing this. I always learn something when I'm being asked question. Maybe I'm explaining something wrong, or a question challenges some view that I've had. So this is always valuable to me.
Thanks. Well, you did explain like 5 times better than me, so it's already very beneficial for everyone. Okay.
Thank you.
Have a good day, Christopher, and we'll talk to you. We'll be in touch soon.
All right, stay in touch. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Так.
Thank you, Dima and colleagues.
Спасибо. Попробуй записать. Record to the cloud. Нажимай кнопочку. Наверное.
Вот ты начал запись теперь, наконец-то. Молодец.
Вовремя.
Да, вот теперь остановил.
Саш, ну хорошо, хоть тебя записали, потому что ты молчал, я в самый главный момент включил.
Ага.
Ладно.
Нет,
придется еще раз, Кристофер.
Стрим был включен. Вот лайв on YouTube стоит, значит, будет запись по ссылке.
Будет, да?
Да, будет.
Ох, это хорошо, потому что, там было много новой информации, интересно. Тогда что, мы можем сейчас расходиться, и эта запись никуда не потеряется, насколько я понял, да?
Да, вот кто-то же включил запись, то есть вот эта live on YouTube, она как работает, она стримит закрытую ссылку YouTube.
Ага. Игорь
а
включил.
то, что вы включили запись, это запись зумовскую.
Да, хорошо. Игорь включил, но он ушел. Значит, наверное, он знает, что делает. Ну, хорошо, тогда всем хорошего вечера. Мне кажется, была такая полезная...
Игорь, Дим, а ты не хочешь пересказать по-русски, резюмировать коротко, если можно, что сказал,
Слушай,
что ответил?
сейчас нет, давай я просто сейчас там у меня дела. Я тогда тебе, перескажу.
Лучше в чатик. Лучше в чатик.
Да.
Да, лучше в чатик, что он ответил, что сказал, да.
Но в 2 словах все нормально.
Не,
Мы
будем
очень богаты, судя по всему. Дим, огромное спасибо тебе за твое время и за эту интересную конференцию. Действительно, если будет фоллоуап, будет здорово. Всем пока-пока.
Да, спасибо, Антон, спасибо. Мне-то не за что, вам спасибо. До свидания.